The night shift at Whitmore Tower had been posted for 23 days. 47 people viewed the listing. 3 accepted. All 3 quit within a week. No explanations, no warnings, no forwarding information left in the security logbook that might help the next man understand what drove them away. Tonight, Marcus Brennan would become number 4, walking into a 72-story monument of glass and steel on Chicago's northwest edge, unaware that before sunrise he would face a choice that would define the rest of his life, his daughter's security or his conscience. Marcus stood in the dim glow of streetlights outside the tower at 11 o'clock, phone vibrating in his coat pocket. He pulled it out. The screen showed a message from Elise sent 10 minutes ago, "Daddy be safe," followed by 3 heart emojis she'd only recently learned to use. 7 years old and already worrying about him the way Sarah used to. He typed back quickly, "Always in, baby girl. Sleep tight," and pocketed the phone before the guilt could settle deeper into his chest. The building rose above him like a blade cutting into the October sky, every window dark except for scattered squares of light on the upper floors, where some executive had forgotten to shut down for the night. Marcus pushed through the revolving door into a lobby of polished marble and architectural silence, the kind of space designed to impress visitors who would never see it like this, hollow and echoing at the hour when the cleaners had finished and the white-collar workers had long since returned to their mortgaged homes and leased sedans. 5:30 that morning had started the same way the previous 800 mornings had started Marcus awake before the alarm, staring at the water-stained ceiling of a bedroom, barely large enough for the double bed he still couldn't bring himself to replace with a single. Sarah's side hadn't been slept in for 3 years, but he kept her pillow there, kept the wedding photo on the nightstand where he could see it first thing, kept the illusion that maybe if he held on to the physical evidence of what they'd been, the emptiness wouldn't swallow him whole. Elise had been awake too, already dressed in her school uniform, sitting at their cramped kitchen table with a bowl of cereal and a library book about dolphins. The apartment building's elevator had been broken for 6 months. The landlord kept promising repairs that never materialized. 3 flights of stairs every day, but at least the rent was something Marcus could almost manage if he picked up enough shifts. His daughter looked up from her book milk on her upper lip. The morning light through their single window caught the auburn in her hair, Sarah's hair, Sarah's eyes, Sarah's quiet way of watching the world like she was taking notes for later. "Mrs. Patterson asked about the field trip money yesterday." The words landed between them with the weight of all the things Marcus couldn't provide. The school had been planning this museum trip for weeks. $45, might as well have been $400. He'd been 3 days away from eviction last month before the temp agency finally called with the Whitmore Tower posting. "I'll have it next week, sweetheart. Promise, boss." Elise had nodded, gone back to her cereal, her book, her careful performance of not being disappointed. 7 years old and already learning to expect less. The thought made Marcus want to put his fist through the water-stained wall, but instead he'd sat down across from her and asked about the dolphins, listened to her explain echolocation and pod behavior with the earnest enthusiasm of a kid who still believed knowledge mattered, who still trusted that her father's promises meant something. The temp agency office smelled like burnt coffee and defeated expectations. Jake Sullivan had been waiting outside when Marcus arrived, leaning against the brick wall with his tool belt still on from whatever plumbing job he'd finished that morning. 45 years old, built like a fire hydrant, with the kind of face that had seen enough of life's machinery break down that very little surprised him anymore. "Whitmore Tower, Mark, you sure about this?" Marcus had pulled the job posting from his jacket. "Night security, 11 to 7 time and a half benefits after 90 days. The pay would cover rent, utilities, food, and maybe start chipping away at the medical debt that kept growing interest like a tumor. 3 people quit already. You hear why, Wang?" "No." Jake shifted his weight tool belt, jangling. "But I heard things. Building management doesn't like questions. Night shift sees things they're not supposed to see. I need the money. Rent's due Friday. Let me spot you, brother. You can pay me back whenever." The offer sat between them, generous and impossible. Marcus had known Jake since their Morrison construction days, back when Marcus wore a hard hat and supervised crews and brought home a paycheck that let Sarah stay home with baby Elise. Back before the cancer diagnosis, before the experimental treatments that insurance wouldn't cover, before the second mortgage and the third, and the decision to sell everything that wasn't nailed down just to buy another month, another week, another day. "I appreciate it, but I can't keep taking from people. It's not taking, it's family. Family's the reason I need to do this myself. Jake had studied him for a long moment, something saw and knowing in his expression. Your pride's gonna break you someday, Mark. Maybe, but it's all I've got left. Inside the agency, Marcus had signed the paperwork without reading it carefully. Standard liability waivers, background check, authorization, direct deposit forms. The woman behind the desk barely looked at him, just pushed papers across the counter, like she was dealing cards in a game where everyone loses, eventually. Between signing and his first shift, Marcus had done what any sensible man would do: research. Google turned up nothing unusual about Whitmore Tower. Standard corporate headquarters, flagship property of Hartford Development Corporation, owned primarily by the Whitmore family, with Diana Whitmore as CEO after her mother's death 7 years prior. Awards for architectural design, LEED certification. All the usual corporate achievement markers that meant nothing to the people who actually kept the building standing. Reddit had been more interesting. An anonymous post from 6 months ago: don't work Whitmore nights. Management doesn't want you asking questions. Last guy who did got fired for performance issues that nobody could explain. No follow-up. No clarification. Just a warning shot across the bow for anyone paying attention. Marcus had screenshot it, sent it to Jake, received back a text that said simply, be careful. That evening, before heading to the tower, he'd walked at least 3 blocks to Colleen Murphy's apartment. 62 years old, Irish to the bone, with rosary beads on her nightstand and a voice that could cut through steel when neighborhood kids got too loud outside her window. She'd watched Elise on nights when Marcus had to work before, never charged more than he could afford, always had the girl fed and half asleep on the couch by the time he came to collect her. You look worried. Elise had her overnight bag, her homework folder, the stuffed rabbit she claimed she was too old for, but couldn't sleep without. She was watching Marcus with those eyes that missed nothing. New job tonight, big building downtown, nothing dangerous. You'll come back. The question hit him like a punch. She'd asked it every night for the first year after Sarah died. Like maybe fathers disappeared too if you stop watching them carefully enough. Always baby girl, I always come home. She'd hugged him then, small arms around his waist, face pressed into his jacket. He'd held her longer than necessary, breathing in the strawberry shampoo Colleen had helped her pick out, trying to memorize the weight of her trust. Walking away from Mrs. Murphy's apartment had felt like walking away from everything that mattered, even though he knew he'd be back in 8 hours. The October night was cold enough to see breath, the streets largely empty, except for the occasional bus grinding past. Chicago at this hour belonged to the workers who kept the city functioning while everyone else slept. The janitors, the security guards, the all-night diner cooks, the invisible infrastructure of low-wage labor that held the whole precarious structure together. Now standing in Whitmore Tower's lobby with the keycard and radio in hand, Marcus understood why 3 people had quit. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was watchful, waiting. The kind of quiet that made every small sound feel significant, every shadow a potential threat. Thomas Wright came around the security desk as Marcus approached, moving with the nervous energy of a man who'd already made his decision to leave. 50-something, gray at the temples, with the soft build of someone who'd spent decades sitting behind desks. His hands shook slightly as he gathered his jacket and lunch bag. You're Brennan. Yes, sir. I'm not training you, just showing you where things are. Thomas led him through the basics in under 10 minutes. Keycard opens all doors except executive floors, 67 radio stays on Channel 3. Logbook gets signed every hour with floor numbers and times. Break room on the 2nd floor has a microwave and vending machines. His voice stayed flat, mechanical, like he was reading from a script he'd memorized just well enough to get through. The security desk held evidence of Thomas's shift: a full coffee cup, gone cold steam, long since dissipated. Papers scattered across the surface like he'd left in a hurry, though his movements now were slow, deliberate. The logbook lay open to the past 2 weeks. Marcus flipped back through the pages. Entries grew sparser as the dates approached the present. Whole shifts missing signatures. Checkpoints left blank. Previous guards didn't finish their rounds. Thomas stopped gathering his belongings. His back was to Marcus, shoulders tight. They finished. They just stopped writing it down. Why? You'll figure it out. Thomas turned, wouldn't meet his eyes. Just walk the floors, check the doors. Don't look for problems that aren't your concern. What does that mean? It means this is a $12 an hour security job, Brennan, not a detective agency. You walk, you observe, you go home. Thomas picked up his keys, headed for the door. At the threshold, he paused, still not looking back. The people who ask too many questions don't last. Then he was gone, the lobby door swinging shut behind him, leaving Marcus alone with 72 floors of silence and a logbook full of blank spaces where someone had decided the truth wasn't worth recording. Marcus began his first round at 11:30. The checklist taped inside the logbook cover listed specific checkpoints: fire exits, mechanical rooms, executive offices, server rooms, maintenance closets. Floor by floor, east to west, methodical and thorough. The kind of work Marcus understood from his construction days, when safety inspections meant the difference between a building that stood and a building that killed people. Floors 1 through 40 were exactly what they appeared to be. Office space, cubicle farms, conference rooms with whiteboards still covered in half-erased strategic planning diagrams. The emergency lighting cast everything in pale yellow, creating shadows that moved when he moved his reflection, following him in darkened windows that looked out over the city below. By floor 41, the atmosphere changed, lights still on in several offices, computers running, coffee machines warm, like people had just stepped away and might return any moment. Marcus checked doors, tested locks, noted everything in his mental inventory, the way he'd once cataloged construction site hazards: exposed wiring safety risk, unstable scaffolding safety risk. Offices still occupied near midnight in a building where everyone should have gone home. Not a safety risk exactly, but wrong somehow. The kind of wrong that made the hair on his neck stand up. His phone buzzed at midnight. Message from Colleen Murphy. Photo of Elise asleep on the couch. Homework scattered across the coffee table, the rabbit tucked under her arm. Beneath it, a voice message. Marcus stepped into a stairwell to listen, turning the volume low. Hi, Daddy. Mrs. Murphy said I could stay up till you texted goodnight, but I got too sleepy. I hope your new job is okay. I know you're working really hard for us. I love you. See you in the morning. The recording ended. Marcus saved it, played it again. Her voice was small and thick with approaching sleep, but underneath ran a current of something else, worry pretending to be cheerfulness. The same performance she'd given that morning about the field trip, about not minding, about understanding that things were tight. 7 years old and already learning to make herself smaller so her father wouldn't feel like he was failing. He sent back a text, "Love you, baby girl, sleep tight," and pocketed the phone. The building felt different after that, less empty, like he was carrying something precious through its corridors, a reminder of why he was here, why any of this mattered. Elise deserved better than a father who scraped by, better than an apartment with a broken elevator and water stains on the ceiling, better than a life where $45 for a field trip felt impossible. The upper floors required different keycards. Marcus found the access credentials in the security desk, labeled and organized in a metal box that hadn't been opened in weeks based on the dust. Floor 50 and above, restricted access, executive territory. The elevator chimed soft and hollow as he rose, the car empty, except for him and his reflection in the polished steel doors. Floor 58 was different from everything below. No offices, no cubicles, just mechanical systems and infrastructure, the building's hidden skeleton. Industrial lighting, concrete floors, the steady hum of HVAC equipment, and electrical systems that kept everything running. This was the kind of space Marcus understood instinctively, the guts of the structure where function mattered more than appearance. The fire suppression system occupied its own room, marked with red emergency signage and multiple warning labels. Marcus almost walked past. This wasn't on the checkpoint list, but something made him stop, made him try the handle. Unlocked. Inside, pipes ran floor to ceiling, labeled with colored tape and stenciled codes. Pressure gauge had mounted at eye level, their needles pointing to numbers that should have meant something to anyone who understood the system. Marcus had done enough construction work to know the basics. Fire suppression in a building this size operated on water pressure. High pressure meant the sprinklers could fight a blaze. Low pressure meant the system would engage, but accomplish nothing except giving people a false sense of security, while flames consumed everything around them. The main gauge read 42 psi. Marcus stared at it, certain he was misreading. He checked the posted specifications on the wall system, requirement 110 psi minimum. He checked the gauge again. 42. He found the backup gauge 15 feet down the same pipe. 41. A maintenance log hung on a clipboard near the door. Marcus flipped through it. Entries going back 8 months all signed off as normal. System pressure 110 psi. No issues noted. Initials at the bottom, RG Robert Garrison, Operations Director, according to the signature key. Someone had been lying for 8 months. Someone had been checking these systems, seeing these gauges, and writing down false numbers, signing their name to documents that said everything was fine, while the building's primary fire safety system operated at less than 40% capacity. Marcus pulled out his phone, photographed the gauges from multiple angles. The numbers were clear, undeniable. 42 psi. He photographed the maintenance log, the specifications sheet, the serial numbers on the equipment. Then he stood there in the mechanical room alone, with the steady hum of failing infrastructure, and felt the weight of what he'd found settle onto his shoulders like snow that wouldn't melt. 5,000 people worked in this building during business hours. Secretaries, executives, maintenance workers, food service, staff, cleaning crews. People with families who expected them to come home. People who walked past fire alarm pull stations every day and never thought about whether the system they trusted would actually save them. The sprinklers would trigger if there was smoke. The alarms would sound. Everyone would do exactly what they've been trained to do in fire drills, moving toward exits in orderly lines while the sprinkler system engaged and delivered a light mist. Maybe enough to slow flames. Definitely not enough to extinguish them. Definitely not enough to save lives in the upper floors where evacuation took longest. Marcus checked his watch. 2:17 in the morning. He pulled out the radio, keyed the channel. Security to building management. Need immediate contact. Static, silence. He tried again. This is Marcus Brennan, overnight security. I need to speak with building management. Emergency situation. Nothing. The radio channel stayed dead. He checked the contact sheet in his security packet. Building management office closed after 6 p.m. Emergency maintenance line, he dialed it, got a voicemail box that sounded like it hadn't been checked in months, based on the robotic voice that told him the mailbox was full. The building manager's after-hours contact was listed at the bottom of the sheet. Patricia Owens. Marcus dialed, counted 12 rings before a woman's voice answered, thick with interrupted sleep and immediate irritation. This is Patricia Owens. Who is this, Ms. Owens? This is Marcus Brennan, overnight security at Whitmore Tower. I'm sorry to wake you, but I've found a serious problem with the fire suppression system. The pressure is critically low and I need... The fire suppression system was inspected last month. It's fine. Ma'am, I'm looking at the pressure gauges right now. They're reading 42 psi. The system requires... I don't know what you think you're seeing, but our systems are inspected quarterly by certified technicians. If there was a problem, they would have caught it. Marcus kept his voice level, professional. The maintenance logs show normal readings, but the actual gauges... Listen carefully, Mr. Brennan. The irritation in Owens's voice hardened into something sharper. You're new, so let me explain how this works. The night shift is simple. You walk your rounds, you sign the logs, you go home in the morning. You don't create problems that aren't there. You don't make phone calls at 2 in the morning questioning systems that have been certified by professionals. You don't make everyone's job harder because you're overeager to prove something. This isn't about proving anything. This is a safety poem. What it is, Mr. Brennan, is above your pay grade and outside your job description. You want to keep this position. Stop looking for trouble where there isn't any. The line went dead. Marcus stood in the mechanical room, phone in one hand, radio in the other, understanding now what Thomas Wright had meant, what the previous guards had learned, what the blank spaces in the logbook represented. The building had problems that management didn't want found, questions that weren't supposed to be asked, truth that wasn't supposed to be recorded. He could walk away, finish his shift, sign the log, go home to Elise, collect his paycheck, keep his head down and his mouth shut like every other person who'd learned that survival meant not seeing what was right in front of you. But 5,000 people worked here. 5,000 people whose lives depended on systems that someone had decided weren't worth maintaining honestly. Marcus checked the time again. 3:47. He had 3 hours until his shift ended. 3 hours to decide whether keeping quiet was worth what it would cost him to live with himself. He left the mechanical room and continued upward. Floors 59 through 72 told the same story. Fire suppression pressure gauges, all reading between 40 and 45 psi. Maintenance logs, all claiming normal operations. 22 floors of compromised safety systems, all signed off as functional by Robert Garrison, all ignored by building management that didn't want problems that might affect their bottom line or their liability insurance or their executive bonuses. Floor 67 was different from the others. Executive territory. Corner offices with views of Lake Michigan, conference rooms with furniture that cost more than Marcus made in 6 months. This was where Diana Whitmore worked, where the company's senior leadership made decisions about quarterly earnings and strategic acquisitions and market positioning. This was where people decided what mattered and what didn't, who was important and who was expendable. Their fire suppression system read 43 psi. Marcus stood in the executive mechanical closet photographing gauges and maintenance logs, building a documentation trail that might save lives or might just cost him the only income keeping his daughter housed and fed. The choice hadn't felt like a choice when he started. Now at 4 in the morning with the city dark beyond the windows and Elise asleep 3 miles away, trusting that her father would come home, it felt impossible. He found a service terminal in a maintenance office, the kind of networked computer that building technicians use to monitor systems and log repairs. Someone had left it unlocked. Someone had taped the login credentials to the monitor on a post-it note: admin, showered admin 123. Security through obscurity, the kind of lazy practice that happened when nobody thought the overnight guard would care enough to look. Marcus logged in, pulled up the service records. 8 months of falsified maintenance reports, all signed by Garrison. But underneath those records, buried in the file structure, he found something else: vendor contracts. 3 companies had been awarded the building's fire suppression maintenance over the past 5 years. Companies with similar names, similar addresses, all incorporated in Delaware, with minimal public information available. He screenshotted everything: the contracts, the payment records, the maintenance logs, the email chain buried in Garrison's archived messages where someone discussed managing inspections and maintaining necessary appearances for insurance compliance. 5,000 people, 22 floors, 8 months of lies. Marcus logged out, wiped down the keyboard, closed the office door behind him. His shift ended in 90 minutes. The sun would rise in 45. He walked back down to the security desk, past the empty offices and silent corridors, carrying evidence of negligence that could destroy careers or save lives depending on who saw it first. The logbook lay open. He was supposed to sign each floor note. The time confirmed everything was secure. The previous entries stared up at him, weeks of signatures, followed by blank spaces where someone had stopped recording what they'd seen, stopped asking questions that management didn't want answered. Marcus picked up the pen. He could write what everyone expected: all floors checked, no issues, system secure. Go home. Get paid. Let someone else worry about fire suppression and corporate liability, in the gap between what the gauges showed and what the paperwork claimed. His phone sat on the desk beside the logbook. The lock screen showed Elise's last message: Daddy, be safe. 7 years old and already learning that the world was a place where fathers worked overnight shifts for $12 an hour, where field trips cost too much, where promises about next week meant maybe never. Learning that safety was something you hoped for, not something you could count on. What would he tell her when she was older, when she understood more, when she asked him about the choices he'd made and the reasons why? What story would he want to give her about who her father was when nobody was watching? Marcus closed the logbook without signing it. He pulled out his phone, opened his email, began typing. The subject line read, urgent, critical fire safety violation, Whitmore Tower. The body laid out everything he'd found, floor by floor, gauge by gauge, with photographs attached. He sent it to every address he could find in the building's emergency contact database: City Fire Marshal, Corporate Management, Building Operations, Safety Compliance. He sent it with his name attached, his employee ID number, his direct contact information. Then he accessed the building's alert system, the one reserved for actual emergencies, and triggered a level 2 fire notification. Not enough to evacuate the building or activate sprinklers, just enough to create an official incident report that would be automatically forwarded to the fire marshal's office at the start of business. Just enough to make sure that what he'd found couldn't be quietly buried or explained away. The system logged the alert 5:37 a.m. initiated by EMS Brennan's security badge 4471. Reason critical equipment failure, fire suppression system floors 50 to 72. Requires immediate inspection. No taking it back now. No pretending he hadn't seen what he'd seen. No protecting himself with willful ignorance. Marcus sat down at the security desk, pulled out his phone, and listened to Elisa's voice message 3 more times. Her sleepy words, her trust, her love. The recording ended, and he saved it again. Like somehow preserving the audio file could preserve the moment, could keep her safe from whatever came next. The building felt different now. Less empty, more expectant. Like it was holding its breath, waiting to see what happened when you decided the truth mattered more than your paycheck. Waiting to see what broke first, the systems or the man who'd found them failing. His shift ended at 7. Marcus signed out in the logbook, noted the time, left the incident report number in the comments section where the morning shift would find it, and asked questions he wouldn't be there to answer. He gathered his jacket, checked his phone 1 more time for messages that hadn't arrived, and walked through the employee entrance into pale October light that made the city look new. Nobody stopped him. Nobody asked questions. The morning shift guard, Mike something according to his name tag, nodded as they passed in the doorway, already focused on his own day ahead. The world kept turning. People kept moving. And somewhere in server farms and email inboxes, the messages Marcus had sent were waiting to detonate like unexploded ordnance. The train ride home took 40 minutes. Marcus sat in a window seat watching Chicago wake up around him. People heading to work, students heading to school, the whole intricate machinery of daily life grinding forward on the assumption that buildings were safe, that systems worked, that someone somewhere was paying attention to the details that mattered. Colleen Murphy's apartment smelled like coffee and bacon when he arrived. Elise was at the kitchen table, already dressed, working on homework that was due later that day. She looked up when he entered, and her face broke into the kind of smile that made every sleepless hour feel worthwhile. "Daddy, how was it?" "Was the building really big?" Marcus sat down across from her, accepted the coffee Mrs. Murphy pressed into his hands. "Biggest I've ever worked in." "Did you see any ghosts?" He laughed despite the exhaustion pulling at his bones, despite the knowledge that his phone could ring any minute with news that would change everything. "No ghosts, just a lot of empty hallways and machines that needed checking." "Are you going back tonight?" The question hung between them. Marcus didn't know the answer. He'd sent emails that accused the building's operations director of negligence. He'd triggered an emergency alert that would bring inspectors and questions and scrutiny that Whitmore Towers management clearly didn't want. He'd put his name on documentation that could save lives or end his employment, probably both. "I don't know, sweetheart." Elise nodded, went back to her homework. She was solving multiplication problems, her handwriting careful and precise, Sarah's handwriting. Marcus watched her work, felt the weight of the morning settling onto him like snow that wouldn't stop falling. Mrs. Murphy touched his shoulder. "You look troubled." "Just tired." "You're a poor liar, Marcus Brennan." She refilled his coffee, lowered her voice. "Whatever you're carrying, remember you're not carrying it alone." But he was alone. That was the thing about choices like this. You made them by yourself in mechanical rooms at 4 in the morning when nobody was watching. You live with the consequences by yourself, whether those consequences meant losing the job that kept your daughter fed, or living with the knowledge that you'd stayed silent while 5,000 people walked into a building with broken safety systems. His phone rang at 10:17. Unknown number. Marcus almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Mr. Brennan," a woman's voice, professional, neutral. "This is Margaret O'Brien. I'm the Director of Human Resources for Whitmore Corporation. Ms. Whitmore would like to meet with you this afternoon. Are you available at 2 o'clock? The request landed like a punch. Not a termination call, not a threat, an invitation to meet with the CEO. "Why does she want to see me?" "She received your incident report. She has questions." A pause. "Mr. Brennan, I should tell you that Ms. Whitmore takes safety concerns very seriously. This isn't a disciplinary meeting." Marcus looked at Elise, still working on multiplication, unaware that her father's life was pivoting on a phone call. "I'll be there. Second floor reception area. Ask for me when you arrive." The line went dead. Marcus set down his phone, picked up his coffee, discovered his hands were shaking enough to make the surface ripple. Mrs. Murphy was watching him. What was that? The CEO wants to meet me. That's good, isn't it? I don't know. Marcus stood needing movement, needing air. I need to go home. Get a few hours sleep. Marcus, Mrs. Murphy's voice stopped him at the door. Whatever you did, whatever you found, you did the right thing. Don't forget that when they try to make you doubt it, he wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that doing the right thing mattered, that truth won out, that a man could stand on principle without losing everything that depended on him staying employed. But he'd lived enough years in the gap between what should happen and what actually happened to know better. The walk home took 10 minutes. Marcus climbed 3 flights of stairs to an apartment that needed repairs he couldn't afford, collapsed onto a bed that still felt too big without Sarah in it, and tried to sleep. His mind wouldn't stop running. Diana Whitmore, CEO billionaire, one of the youngest self-made fortunes in America, according to the articles he'd read while researching the building. Why would someone like that care what an overnight security guard found? Why would she want to meet him instead of just firing him and burying the problem? Sleep came eventually restless and full of dreams about pressure gauges and falling buildings, and Elise asking questions he couldn't answer. When his alarm woke him at 1 o'clock, he felt worse than when he'd laid down. But he showered dressed in the only suit he owned, the one he'd worn to Sarah's funeral, the one that still smelled faintly of mothballs and grief, and headed back downtown to meet a woman who could end his employment with a word, or maybe possibly do something he didn't dare hope for. The city looked different in afternoon light, busy, full alive with people who had jobs and futures, and the kind of certainty that came from not having to choose between rent money and conscience. Marcus took the train back to the tower, stood in the lobby where 12 hours ago he'd walked rounds in silence, and approached the second-floor reception desk like a man approaching the gallows. "I'm here to see Margaret O'Brien, Marcus Brennan." The receptionist made a call, nodded, gestured toward a waiting area. Marcus sat in furniture that cost more than his monthly rent, surrounded by corporate art and strategic vision statements framed on the walls, and waited for whatever came next. Margaret O'Brien appeared in the waiting area at 2:03, a woman in her late 30s, with the kind of professional composure that came from years of managing personnel crises. She wore a navy blazer and carried a leather portfolio, her handshake firm but not aggressive. "Mr. Brennan, thank you for coming on short notice." Marcus stood tugging at his suit jacket that fit slightly too loose after 3 years of stress-driven weight loss. "You said Ms. Whitmore had questions." "She does. But first I need to conduct a preliminary interview, standard procedure when employees submit incident reports of this magnitude." They walked through corridors lined with awards and architectural photography, past glass-walled conference rooms, where people in expensive clothes discussed strategies that would never include his name. Margaret led him to a small office on the 3rd floor, gestured to a chair across from a desk that held nothing but a laptop and a legal pad. The interview started with background. Where had he worked before Morrison Construction Site Supervisor 11 years until the company filed bankruptcy in 2021? Why had he left that position? The company folded, took his pension and health benefits with it. What had he been doing since temp work, whatever the agencies could find, whatever paid enough to keep his daughter housed? Margaret took notes without judgment, her pen moving across the legal pad in neat, economical strokes. "Tell me about your wife." The question caught him sideways. "Why does that matter?" "Ms. Whitmore wants context. She's thorough." Marcus looked out the window at Chicago, sprawling beyond the glass, the city where Sarah had died in a hospital bed, while their insurance company found new and creative reasons to deny coverage for treatments that might have bought them more time. "Sarah died 3 years ago, cancer. Stage 4 when they caught it. We spent 18 months fighting it with everything we had and everything we could borrow. It wasn't enough." "I'm sorry." Margaret's voice carried actual sympathy, not the performative kind that people offered when they had no idea what loss felt like. "Medical debt. Still paying you will be for another decade at this rate." She made another note. "And your daughter Elise, she's 7. "Yes." "Who watches her when you work nights?" "Neighbor, Colleen Murphy. She's good with kids." Margaret set down her pen, met his eyes directly. "Mr. Brennan, I'm going to be frank with you. What you found last night, what you reported, it's serious, career-ending for multiple people, potentially criminal. Before I take you upstairs to meet Ms. Whitmore, I need to know, did you report this because you saw an opportunity, Lawsuit settlement, 15 minutes of publicity. The accusation landed without heat, just a question that needed answering. Marcus understood it. A man desperate enough to work overnight security for $12 an hour was a man who might see angles, might calculate leverage, might turn crisis into cash. I reported it because 5,000 people could burn to death if there's a fire on the upper floors. That's the only reason. Margaret studied his face like she was reading a contract for hidden clauses. Whatever she found there seemed to satisfy her. She closed the legal pad, stood. Ms. Whitmore's office is on 67. She doesn't usually meet with hourly employees, so understand that this conversation is already unusual. Be honest, be direct. She values both. The elevator to the executive floor required a special key card that Margaret swiped before pressing the button. They rose in silence, Marcus watching the numbers climb, wondering if this was how condemned men felt riding toward their execution. The doors opened onto a different world. Hardwood floors, original artwork, floor-to-ceiling windows, with views that turned the city into a possession. A woman behind a reception desk glanced up, recognized Margaret, waved them through without question. They walked past offices where people made decisions worth millions, past conference rooms with leather chairs and presentation screens, toward a corner suite that commanded views of both the city and the lake. Diana Whitmore stood at the window when they entered, her back to them, silhouetted against light that made her seem less like a person and more like an idea. She turned as the door closed, and Marcus got his first clear look at the woman whose name was on the building. 32 years old, though she carried herself with the certainty of someone older. Dark hair pulled back in a style that was professional without being severe. Eyes that were blue and sharp, and currently examining Marcus with an intensity that made him want to check if his tie was straight. She wore a charcoal suit that probably cost what he made in 3 months, but something about the way she inhabited it suggested she'd be just as comfortable in work clothes on a job site. "Mr. Brennan, please sit." She gestured to chairs arranged around a low table, the kind of informal meeting setup that was supposed to make people feel at ease. It didn't work. Marcus sat aware that his suit was dated and his shoes needed polish, and everything about him screamed temporary employee who didn't belong in spaces like this. Diana took the chair across from him, not behind her desk. Power move or genuine attempt at equal footing, Marcus couldn't tell. Margaret settled into a third chair, portfolio open, ready to document whatever came next. "I received your incident report this morning, along with 47 photographs, 16 documents, and an emergency alert that's currently being investigated by the Chicago Fire Marshal's office." Diana's voice was controlled, giving away nothing. "Why did you report this?" Same question Margaret had asked. Same question Patricia Owens had dismissed at 2 in the morning. Marcus gave the same answer. "Because the fire suppression system is dangerous. Because people work here who trust it'll protect them. Because it won't. You knew reporting it would likely cost you your position." "Yes." "Then why?" Diana leaned forward slightly, and Marcus understood that this was the question that mattered, the one she actually wanted answered. "I need to understand what made you risk your only income." The answer came easier than it should have, rising from some place in his chest that hadn't fully calcified into bitterness yet. "I have a daughter. She's 7. Every morning I tell her to do what's right, even when it's hard. How could I look at her if I ignored this? How could I teach her that principles matter if I traded mine for a paycheck?" Something shifted in Diana's expression, a crack in the professional facade. She glanced at Margaret, back to Marcus. "The 3 security guards who worked this position but before you, did you know any of them?" "No. They all quit within a week. No notice, no explanation recorded." Diana pulled a folder from the table beside her, flipped it open. "I had HR pull their exit interviews this morning." "Want to know what they said?" Marcus waited. "Nothing. All 3 refused to complete exit paperwork, just collected their final paychecks and left." She closed the folder. "You're the first person who stayed long enough to see what they saw. You're the first one who reported it. Maybe they had families who couldn't afford the risk. Maybe, or maybe they didn't care enough to take it." Diana stood, walked back to the window. The city stretched below her like a game board. "I've been CEO for 7 years, Mr. Brennan. Took over when my mother died. She built this company on the principle that buildings should be safe, beautiful, and honest. I thought I was honoring that. I thought the systems I put in place, the people I hired, The quarterly reports I reviewed, I thought it meant I was paying attention. She turned back, and for the first time, Marcus saw past the polish to something raw underneath. You found in one night what my entire facilities team missed or ignored for 8 months. That suggests either catastrophic incompetence or something worse. I need to know which, and I need help from someone I can trust to tell me the truth. You don't know me. I know you risked everything to do what was right. In my experience, that's rarer than any credential. Diana returned to her chair. I can't offer you a permanent position. Not yet. There are processes, background checks, board approvals. But I can hire you as a consultant, $5,000 for 2 weeks. I need you to help me investigate what else we've missed. What other corners have been cut? Who else has been signing off on lies? $5,000, 2 weeks of work. Enough to pay rent, catch up on utilities, cover Elise's field trip, and a dozen others. Enough to breathe for the first time in months. But also enough to paint a target on his back, to mark him as someone who'd aligned with the CEO against operations management to guarantee that Robert Garrison and whoever else was involved would see him as a threat. What makes you think I'm qualified for that? You found the problem. You documented it properly. You reported it despite every incentive to stay quiet. Diana's eyes held his. You have construction experience, which means you understand systems. You are not afraid to ask questions that make people uncomfortable, and you need the money badly enough that you won't waste my time or yours. The brutal honesty of that last part cut through the politeness. She was acknowledging what they both knew: he was desperate, and desperation made people useful in ways comfort never could. Why me instead of a professional investigator? Because investigators make people nervous. They come in with assumptions and agendas. You're already in the building. Already have access, already proved you're willing to look at things everyone else ignored. Diana pulled a document from her portfolio, slid it across the table. 2 weeks, full access to maintenance records, personnel files, service contracts. You report directly to me. Everything you find, I see first. Marcus looked at the contract without touching it. The money would change things for Elise. Would mean stability options, the ability to say yes instead of maybe next time. But it would also mean diving deeper into whatever corruption had rotted this building's infrastructure. Would mean making enemies of people who'd already demonstrated they were willing to falsify safety records. Would mean trusting that a billionaire CEO's promise of protection meant anything when corporate liability lawyers got involved. If I find something that implicates your operations director, what happens? Then he's terminated and prosecuted. I don't protect people who endanger lives. What if it goes higher than him? Diana's expression hardened. Then I deal with it, no matter who's involved. The certainty in her voice made Marcus believe her, though belief was a luxury he'd learned not to indulge freely. Still, the contract sat between them, and Elise needed new shoes, and the electricity bill was 2 weeks overdue. And sometimes a man had to choose between safety and principle and hope they weren't mutually exclusive. He picked up the pen Margaret offered. Where do I start? The next week dissolved into patterns Marcus recognized from his construction days: systematic investigation, methodical documentation, the slow accumulation of evidence that built a case brick by brick. Diana had arranged a small office for him on the 40th floor, windowless but functional, with a computer terminal and access to the building's entire maintenance database. Jake called the second-day voice tight with concern. Mark, you sure about this? Working directly for the CEO? That's got to make you a target. Marcus was buried in procurement records, cross-referencing vendor contracts against service reports. Already was a target. Now at least I'm getting paid for it. Yeah, but $5,000 isn't enough if someone decides you're a problem worth solving permanently. I'm careful. Careful doesn't stop a car that runs a red light or a mugging gone wrong. You're poking at something that costs someone millions. People kill for a lot less. The warning lodged in Marcus's chest, familiar and unwelcome. Jake wasn't wrong, but backing down now meant letting whoever had falsified those records keep operating, keep endangering lives, keep betting that nobody would care enough to stop them. I appreciate the concern, brother, but I'm seeing this through. Jake sighed, the sound of a man who'd known him long enough to recognize immovable stubbornness. At least keep your head on a swivel. And call me if anything feels wrong. 3 days into his investigation, Marcus found the pattern he'd been looking for. 18 separate maintenance contracts over 5 years, all awarded to companies with similar naming conventions: Apex Building Services, Vertex Property, Maintenance Premier Facility Solutions. The contracts totaled $4.8 million. The companies shared the same incorporation address in Delaware. And when Marcus dug deeper into business registrations and LLC filings, all three traced back to a man named William Garrison, Robert Garrison's brother-in-law. The scheme was elegant in its simplicity. Award overpriced contracts to family-owned shell companies. Perform minimal actual maintenance. Falsify inspection reports. Collect inflated payments. Split the difference. No one got hurt as long as nothing actually went wrong, and things rarely went wrong until they went catastrophically wrong. Marcus documented everything: the contracts, the payment records, the incorporation papers, the family connection. He built a timeline showing exactly when each company was formed, when each contract was awarded, how much money had changed hands. By the end of week 1, he had enough evidence to destroy Robert Garrison's career and potentially send him to prison for fraud and criminal negligence. He was compiling the final report when his phone rang. "Unknown number," he answered. "Marcus Brennan. Speaking. You need to stop what you're doing. You need to stop right now, or your daughter's going to learn what happens when people don't listen to warnings." The line went dead before Marcus could respond. His hand trembled as he lowered the phone. They knew about Elise, knew her name, knew she existed, knew she represented leverage that could break him faster than any threat to his own safety. He called Jake immediately. "I need you to pick up Elise from school today. Keep her at your place tonight." "What happened?" "Someone just threatened her. I don't know who, but they know her name." "Jesus, Mark, you need to go to the police. And tell them what? Someone made a vague threat over an untraceable number. They'll file a report and forget about it." Marcus was already packing his laptop, gathering the documents he couldn't leave unguarded. "Just keep her safe, please." "We will. Katie loves having her around. But Mark, this is getting serious. Maybe it's time to walk away." Walking away meant letting Garrison continue his fraud. Meant the fire suppression system stayed broken. Meant 5,000 people kept working in a building where safety was performance art backed by falsified paperwork. Can't do that. Even if it means Elise. The question was a knife between ribs. Everything Marcus did was supposed to be for Elise to give her stability and security and a father who could provide. But what kind of father traded her safety for his principles? What kind of man let his daughter become collateral damage in someone else's corruption? "I'll figure it out. Just keep her close." That evening, Marcus's car told its own story. Someone had slashed all 4 tires while it sat in the building's parking garage. Spray painted across the hood in dripping red letters, "Quit." The security footage showed nothing useful, the cameras conveniently malfunctioning during the crucial 30-minute window. Marcus stood in the garage looking at his vandalized vehicle, understanding that this was escalation. Threats followed by property damage, followed by what? How far would they go to protect $4.8 million in their freedom? He called Margaret O'Brien, reported the incident. Within 2 hours, Diana called him directly. "I'm assigning security to you and your daughter, 24/7 coverage, non-negotiable." Marcus's pride recoiled. "I can handle." "They threatened a 7-year-old child, Mr. Brennan. This isn't about what you can handle. It's about what I won't tolerate." Her voice carried an edge he hadn't heard before, something cold and absolute. "Security will start tomorrow morning. You'll have a driver. Elise will have protection walking to and from school. Your apartment building will have monitoring. If you refuse, I'll terminate the consulting contract because I won't be responsible for what happens when you insist on being vulnerable." The logic was airtight, even if it bruised his ego. Still accepting meant acknowledging he couldn't protect his own daughter, couldn't even keep himself safe while doing work that should have been straightforward. "Thank you. Don't thank me. This is my responsibility, my company, my failure that you're in this position." The next morning, a man appeared outside Marcus's apartment at 6:30. Dave Campbell, mid-30s, built like he'd played college football and stayed in shape afterward. Former Marine, according to the brief introduction he offered, now working private security through a firm Diana retained for executive protection. "I'll be with your daughter whenever she's outside the apartment. School activities, anywhere she goes. I stay visible, but I keep distance. She'll know I'm there, but I won't crowd her. Elise had been terrified when she first saw Dave, a stranger appearing in her life without explanation. But Dave had knelt down to her eye-level, voice gentle. Hi, Elise. I'm Dave. Your dad asked me to make sure you stay safe while he's working on something important. I'm going to walk with you to school, and I'll be around if you need anything. Is that okay? She'd looked to Marcus for confirmation. He'd nodded, tried to smile like this was normal, like 7-year-olds routinely needed armed security details. He's a friend, baby girl. He's here to help. By the third day, Elise had warmed to Dave's presence. He'd learned her favorite subjects, her concerns about an upcoming spelling test, her theories about whether dolphins or whales were smarter. He'd become a fixture, protective, but not intrusive, and Marcus felt the peculiar gratitude of a parent whose child was safer than he could make her himself. Diana called him to her office late that Friday after most of the building had emptied for the weekend. The sun was setting over Lake Michigan, painting the water gold and red. She stood at the window again, but this time she looked tired, the professional armor showing cracks. How's Elise handling the security presence? Marcus settled into the chair he'd begun thinking of as his during these meetings. Better than I expected. Dave's good with kids. He should be. He has 2 daughters of his own. Diana turned from the window. I reviewed your preliminary findings. The connections to Garrison's brother-in-law, the contract fraud, the timeline, it's thorough. It's damning. Yes. She moved to her desk but didn't sit, just leaned against it like the formal furniture was suddenly too much. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Have you found any indication this goes beyond Garrison? The question Marcus had been dreading. The one he'd hoped she wouldn't ask until he had complete certainty. But Diana was looking at him with an expression that suggested she already knew what he'd found and just needed confirmation. Yes. How high? Marcus pulled out his laptop, opened the file he'd flagged that morning. Email thread buried in Garrison's archives, easy to miss unless you were looking for patterns in communication around contract approvals. There's correspondence between Garrison and your father, discussing the fire suppression issues, how to handle them without triggering a full investigation. Your father signed off on deferring repairs until after. Marcus stopped, not wanting to finish the sentence. After what? After the company goes public. There's references to an IPO timeline, suggestions that negative publicity around safety violations would impact the stock valuation. Diana took the laptop, read the email thread in silence. Marcus watched her face, saw the moment comprehension became betrayal, saw the professional mask crack completely to show the daughter underneath. He was willing to risk lives for stock prices. Her voice was barely above a whisper. My father was willing to let people burn rather than admit we had problems that might cost shareholders money. I'm sorry. She looked up at him, eyes bright with something that might have been tears if she allowed them to fall. Don't apologize. You did what I hired you to do. You found the truth. What will you do with it? Diana closed the laptop, handed it back. The movement seemed to cost her something, a physical effort to let go of evidence against her own father. I don't know yet. I need time to think, to verify, to understand how deep this goes. Take whatever time you need. I'll keep investigating. No. She shook her head. You've done enough, more than enough. I can't ask you to keep digging when people are threatening your daughter. They're threatening her because I found something worth hiding. If I stop now, it tells them threats work. It makes Elise a permanent target. Marcus stood, driven by a conviction he couldn't fully articulate. I'm seeing this through, for me, for her, for everyone who works in this building. You hired me to find the truth. Let me finish. Diana studied him like she was trying to solve an equation with too many variables. Why are you really doing this? And don't tell me it's about principles or doing the right thing. What's the real reason? The question demanded honesty that Marcus hadn't planned to offer, but standing in this office with sunset light making everything look temporary and breakable, he found the words anyway. Because for 3 years I felt like I failed. Failed to save my wife. Failed to provide for my daughter. Failed to be anything except a man scrambling for whatever scraps the world throws my way. He met her eyes. This is the first time since Sarah died that I feel like I'm actually doing something that matters. Like I'm someone Elise can be proud of. I'm not giving that up because someone slashed my tires. The silence stretched between them, heavy with things neither of them knew how to say. Diana broke at first, her voice softer than he'd heard before. My mother died 7 years ago. Same disease that took your wife. I was 25, suddenly running a company I barely understood, trying to honor her legacy while my father wanted to sell everything and retire wealthy. We fought for 2 years. Board battles, legal challenges, the whole corporate warfare playbook. I won, but it destroyed whatever relationship we'd had. She moved to the window again, silhouette against dying light. So I understand. The feeling that you're failing people you love. The desperation to prove you're worth something. The need to stand for something that matters even when it costs everything. Marcus joined her at the window, maintaining careful distance, but feeling the strange pull of shared experience, shared grief, shared stubbornness. Below them, Chicago glittered with a million evening lives, people heading home to families and futures they still believed in. What happens now? Diana turned to face him close enough that he could see exhaustion written in fine lines around her eyes. Now I confront my father. Find out how much he knew, how long he's known, whether this is simple greed or something worse. Then I decide whether to destroy him publicly or handle it quietly. What do you want to do? I want to scream. I want to throw him out of the company my mother built. I want to make him answer for every life he was willing to sacrifice. Her jaw tightened. But he's still my father, and I don't know if I'm strong enough to burn that bridge completely. The vulnerability in her admission made Marcus want to reach out, offer comfort, bridge the professional distance that had defined their interactions. But he kept his hands at his sides, aware that crossing that line would change something neither of them might be ready for. For what it's worth, strength, it isn't about burning bridges. It's about building the right ones and knowing which ones to cross. Diana almost smiled. Is that what you tell Elise? I tell her that brave isn't not being scared. It's doing the right thing even when you're terrified. Your daughter is lucky to have you. I'm lucky to have her. She's the only reason I haven't given up entirely. They stood together in the fading light, two people who'd lost too much and were trying to build something from the wreckage. The moment stretched intimate, despite the professional setting, until Diana's phone shattered it with urgent vibration. She checked the screen, and whatever she saw there made her go pale. Dave Campbell just called. Someone tried to approach Elise outside your apartment building. 2 men. Dave intervened. They fled before police arrived. Marcus's world tilted. Is she okay? She's fine, scared but fine. Dave got her inside with Mrs. Murphy. Police are taking statements now. Diana was already moving, grabbing her coat. I'm going with you. You don't have to. They came after a child, Mr. Brennan, a 7-year-old girl whose only crime was being your daughter. I'm absolutely going. Her voice carried fury that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with violated principles. This ends tonight. The drive to Marcus's neighborhood took 20 minutes that felt like hours. Diana had her driver break speed limits, the black sedan weaving through traffic with corporate disregard for citations. Marcus called Mrs. Murphy, got confirmation that Elise was safe, upset but unhurt. Called Jake, told him what happened, ignored his friend's suggestion that maybe it was time to get Elise out of the city entirely. Dave met them outside the apartment building, professional composure intact, but anger simmering underneath. 2 white males, 30s, approached while she was walking home from the corner store with Mrs. Murphy. I was 20 feet behind. They tried to grab her. I intervened. They ran. Got a partial plate, gave it to police. They're reviewing security footage from neighboring buildings. Marcus pushed past him, took the stairs 3 at a time, burst into Mrs. Murphy's apartment to find Elise wrapped in a blanket on the couch, her face blotchy from crying. She looked up when he entered, and something in her expression broke him. Daddy, I was so scared. He gathered her into his arms, felt her shake against his chest, breathed in strawberry shampoo and childhood terror. I know, baby girl. I know, but you're safe now. Dave protected you. The men said they had a message for you. Marcus pulled back enough to see her face. What message? They said to tell you that next time Dave won't be there. The threat landed like a physical blow. These weren't random criminals. They were calculated, deliberate, willing to traumatize a child to send a message to her father. And they'd gotten close enough to speak to her, close enough that if Dave had been seconds slower. Diana appeared in the doorway, saw Elise's tears, and something in her expression transformed from corporate fury to something more primal. She moved to the couch, knelt in front of the terrified child. "Hi, Elise, I'm Diana. I work with your father." Her voice was gentle but steady. "I want you to know that what happened today won't happen again. I'm making sure of it. You're going to have the best protection in the city. People who will keep you safer than anyone has ever kept you before. Do you believe me?" Elise looked at this stranger with red-rimmed eyes, trying to decide if trust was warranted. "Are you Daddy's boss?" "I am." "Are you going to fire him because bad people are trying to hurt us?" Diana's expression softened further. "No, sweetheart, I'm going to stop the bad people. Your father did something very brave, and sometimes when people are brave, other people get scared and act like bullies. But bullies only win if we let them. We're not going to let them. Promise? I promise." Diana held out her hand, and after a moment, Elise shook it solemnly. Mrs. Murphy appeared with tea, her Irish pragmatism a steadying force. "The police want statements from everyone. They're in the hallway." The next hour dissolved into bureaucratic ritual statements, forms, witness descriptions, promises to follow up. The police were professional, but Marcus could read their subtext. Without better evidence, without identifiable suspects, without proof of intent beyond two men approaching a child, there wasn't much they could do except increase patrols. Diana made calls that changed the landscape. Within 2 hours, she'd arranged for a private security firm to monitor the building, had upgraded the locks on Marcus's apartment door, had offered to relocate them both to a corporate housing unit in a building with actual security infrastructure. Marcus declined the last part. "I appreciate it, but Elise needs stability. Moving her again, changing everything, it'll just scare her more. Then we make this place secure." They stood in Marcus's cramped apartment, while Elise slept fitfully in the bedroom, exhaustion finally overcoming fear. The space was too small for two people who'd grown used to having distance between them, the domestic intimacy of shared crisis breaking down professional barriers. "I should go." Diana moved toward the door. "Let you rest." "Wait." Marcus didn't know what he wanted to say, just knew that her leaving felt wrong somehow. "Why are you doing all this, the security, the investigation, protecting Elise? I'm just a consultant. You've already got enough to fire Garrison to fix the problems. Why keep going?" Diana stopped, turned back. The question seemed to require consideration she hadn't given it before. "Because you trusted me to do the right thing. And because when I met you, when you explained why you reported the fire suppression failure, you said you couldn't look your daughter in the eye if you stayed silent. That resonated with me. Made me realize I've been looking away from things that mattered because it was easier than confronting them." She took a step closer. "My father betrayed everything my mother built, everything I thought we stood for. You showed me that. You risked everything to show me that. The least I can do is make sure you don't lose what matters most." The air between them felt charged with more than professional obligation. Marcus recognized it, the dangerous pull towards someone who understood the weight you carried, who saw your struggle and met it with their own. It would be easy to cross the distance between them, to find comfort in shared grief and shared determination. But Elise was sleeping 15 feet away, and Diana was his employer, and some lines existed for good reasons. "Thank you for everything. Don't thank me yet. We haven't won anything." Diana pulled out her phone. "My father called an emergency board meeting for Monday morning. He's moving to remove me as CEO." The revelation hit Marcus like cold water. "Because of the investigation. Because I told him about it. Told him I knew what he'd done, what Garrison had done, how long they'd been covering it up. He said I was being hysterical, that I was jeopardizing the company over nothing. When I said I was going to the authorities, he threatened to have me removed for breach of fiduciary duty." Can he do that? He can try. He has allies on the board, people who've been loyal to him for decades, people who see me as the inexperienced daughter who got lucky inheriting my mother's shares. Diana's expression hardened. "But I have evidence. I have you. And I have enough anger to burn down everything if they try to protect him." Marcus understood what she was really saying. The battle was escalating beyond fire suppression systems and fraud charges into corporate warfare, where careers and fortunes hung in the balance. And she was asking him to testify, to stand up in front of board members and powerful people and tell them what he'd found, knowing it would paint an even bigger target on his back. What do you need from me? The truth, everything you found documented clearly. Be ready to present it Monday morning. Show them exactly what's been happening under their noses. She met his eyes. And be prepared for them to attack your credibility, your motives, everything about you. My father will try to make you look like an opportunist. Can you handle that? Marcus thought about Elise sleeping in the next room, about the men who tried to grab her, about the choice between backing down and standing firm. The answer was easier than it should have been. I can handle it. Then we go to war Monday. Diana moved to the door again. Get some sleep. Keep Elise close. I'll have additional security posted overnight. She was gone before Marcus could respond, leaving him alone in an apartment that suddenly felt too quiet, too vulnerable, too much like the fragile illusion of safety it had always been. He checked on Elise, found her curled around her stuffed rabbit, breathing steady but occasionally whimpering in her sleep. He sat on the edge of her bed, stroked her hair the way Sarah used to, and made promises he hoped he could keep. The weekend passed in suspended animation. Jake and his wife Katie took Elise Saturday and Sunday, giving Marcus time to prepare his presentation for the board meeting. He compiled every piece of evidence, the contracts, the emails, the falsified reports, the timeline showing exactly when each decision was made and by whom. He built a case that was airtight, irrefutable, the kind of documentation that left no room for excuses. Jake called Sunday night. Mark, Katie's worried. Hell, I'm worried. You're about to go up against a billionaire and his allies. Even if you win, you lose. They'll destroy your reputation, make sure you never work in this city again. Maybe. Not maybe. Definitely. Rich people protect their own. Always have. Jake's voice carried the weariness of someone who'd seen this story before. Is it worth it? Really? Marcus looked at the presentation on his laptop, the evidence that would end careers and possibly send people to prison. Thought about Diana standing in his apartment, promising to protect Elise, promising to fight. Thought about the 5,000 people who still worked in a building with compromised safety systems. A man who stays silent when people's lives are at risk isn't a man worth being. That's what I want Elise to understand. That principles matter more than safety. Principles don't feed your kid brother. No, but they teach her what kind of world to fight for. Monday morning arrived cold and clear, the kind of October day where Chicago looked almost beautiful if you didn't think too hard about what winter was coming. Marcus dressed in his funeral suit again, the one that was becoming his armor for impossible battles. He dropped Elise at school with Dave Campbell shadowing her, ignored her worried questions about where he was going, promised he'd pick her up afterward. Diana met him in the lobby at 9:30. She wore navy severe and professional, her expression giving nothing away. They rode the elevator to floor 70 in silence, both understanding that words were inadequate for what came next. The boardroom occupied the tower's northeast corner, glass walls offering views that suggested power and permanence. 9 board members were already seated when Diana and Marcus entered. Alan Whitmore sat at the head of the table, 68 years old and radiating the confidence of a man who'd never been seriously challenged. Robert Garrison stood near the windows, and when his eyes landed on Marcus, something murderous flickered across his face before professional composure reasserted itself. Diana took her seat, gestured for Marcus to stand beside her. The board members watched with varying degrees of curiosity and suspicion. Who was this man in the cheap suit, and why was he being included in executive business? Alan opened without preamble. This emergency session has been called to address serious concerns about Diana's fitness to serve as CEO. Recent actions have demonstrated reckless judgment, unauthorized expenditures, and decision-making that puts the company at significant financial and legal risk. He laid out his case with practiced precision. $8 million spent on emergency repairs without board approval, a fire marshal investigation that could trigger regulatory fines, a consultant hired to investigate internal operations based on unverified accusations from a temporary employee with questionable credentials. Diana's emotional response to routine maintenance issues has created a crisis where none existed. Her inability to separate personal feelings from business judgment makes her unfit for leadership. I move that she be removed as CEO effective immediately, with interim leadership to be determined by this board. One board member, a silver-haired man Marcus didn't recognize, seconded the motion immediately. Diana stood her composure absolute. Members of the board, before you vote, I'd like you to see what my emotional response actually uncovered. She nodded to Marcus. He connected his laptop to the presentation screen, pulled up the first image, a pressure gauge reading 42 psi with the specifications chart showing required minimums. This is the fire suppression system on floor 58. The gauge should read 110 psi minimum. It reads 42. The same is true for 22 floors in this building. His voice stayed level, factual. If a fire breaks out on the upper floors, the sprinklers will engage. They'll deliver approximately 40% of necessary water pressure. People will burn to death while the system pretends to save them. He advanced to the next slide, the maintenance log, with Robert Garrison's signature claiming normal operations. For 8 months, these gauges have been reading critical failure, while inspection reports claimed everything was fine. Someone was lying, systematically, deliberately. Murmurs around the table. Board members leaning forward, squinting at the evidence projected larger than life. Marcus showed them the contracts next. The shell companies, the family connections, the payment records showing $4.8 million flowing to companies that performed minimal actual work. Showed them the timeline of when problems were identified, when they were hidden, who knew what and when. And then he showed them the email thread, the one between Robert Garrison and Alan Whitmore, the one discussing deferring repairs, managing inspections, avoiding publicity that might impact the planned IPO. The room went silent. Alan's face had gone white, then red, his hands gripping the table edge. That's fabricated. It's from your company email account, time-stamped, forwarded to the IT department for authentication this morning. Diana's voice cut through her father's protest. You knew. You approved deferring life safety repairs to protect stock valuation. You made Robert Garrison's fraud possible. The board erupted. Questions, accusations, demands for explanation. Alan tried to speak over them, claiming the emails were taken out of context, that business required difficult decisions, that Diana was twisting facts to serve her narrative. One board member, a woman in her 50s, with the bearing of someone who'd fought her way to every position she held, cut through the noise. Who is this man? The one presenting. Marcus spoke before Diana could answer. Marcus Brennan, night security guard who found the fire suppression failure on his first shift, former construction supervisor, father of a 7-year-old daughter. He met the woman's eyes. I reported this knowing I'd lose my job. I continued investigating, knowing people were threatening my family. I'm standing here now because 5,000 people work in this building and they deserve to know it won't kill them. What do you gain from this? Nothing except knowing I can look my daughter in the eye when she asks if I did the right thing. The silence that followed felt different from before. Heavier, more certain. Alan played his final card. This man is a fraud, a desperate widower with financial problems, using his dead wife and daughter to manipulate sympathy. He's being paid by Diana to undermine my position to. I threatened his daughter. Robert Garrison's voice cut across the room. Everyone turned. Garrison stood at the window still, but something in his posture had collapsed. I sent men to grab her, to scare him into stopping. I vandalized his car. I made threatening calls. I falsified 8 months of maintenance records and skimmed millions in fraudulent contracts. He looked at Alan. And you knew. You approved the deferred maintenance. You signed off on the contract awards. You told me to handle the night guards who asked questions. Alan's face transformed into something ugly. You're lying to save yourself. I have recordings. Garrison pulled out his phone. Of our conversations. Insurance in case you tried to throw me to the wolves, which you're doing now. So let's all go down together. The room exploded again. Diana raised her voice over the chaos. The motion on the table is to remove me as CEO. I call for an immediate vote. All in favor. 2 hands went up. Alan and his 1 loyalist. Opposed, 7 hands. Diana's expression didn't change, but Marcus saw her shoulders drop slightly, tension releasing. Motion fails. I retain my position. She turned to Garrison. You're terminated. Effective immediately. Security will escort you out. Legal counsel will be in touch regarding criminal charges. Garrison nodded, something like relief in his face. Being fired was better than being thrown to the wolves alone. Diana faced her father. You have 2 choices. Resign from the board today quietly with a statement about pursuing other interests, or I release everything to the authorities and the press and you face criminal prosecution for fraud and reckless endangerment. Alan stood rage and desperation warring in his expression. You would destroy your own father. You were willing to let people die for money. You're not my father anymore. You're just a man who betrayed everything my mother built. The words hung in the air, final and irrevocable. Alan looked around the table, saw no allies, no escape. He grabbed his briefcase and walked out without another word. The board members sat in stunned silence until the door closed. Then the questions began. What happens now? What about liability? What about the IPO? What about public relations? Diana fielded them all with calm authority, laying out a plan she'd clearly prepared: immediate transparency, voluntary disclosure to authorities, a comprehensive safety audit of all company properties, a complete overhaul of maintenance oversight. We turn this into a demonstration of ethical leadership. We show the industry what accountability looks like. We make this our competitive advantage rather than our destruction. The board debated for another hour. Marcus stood silent, watching Diana command the room, seeing her transform crisis into opportunity through force of will and strategic clarity. By the time the meeting ended, she'd secured approval for everything she wanted: emergency funding, independent audits, her choice of new operations director. When the room finally emptied, leaving just Diana and Marcus, she allowed herself one moment of vulnerability. She sat down heavily, put her head in her hands, breathed. I just destroyed my father's career and possibly sent him to prison. Marcus sat beside her. You stopped him from killing people through negligence. There's a difference, Vershu. Does it feel different? I don't know, does it? She looked up, eyes bright with unshed tears. It feels like I'm orphaned. My mother's dead. My father's dead to me now. I'm alone. Without thinking, Marcus reached out and took her hand. The gesture was simple, human, the kind of comfort one person offered another when words weren't enough. You're not alone. Diana's fingers tightened around his. What happens now? Now we fix what's broken. Make this building safe. Make sure your mother's legacy means what it should. And us. The question hung between them, loaded with possibilities neither had fully examined. Marcus was still holding her hand, aware that they'd crossed some invisible line from professional to personal, from CEO and consultant to something more complicated. I don't know, but I'd like to find out. Diana smiled, tentative but real. So would I. Ard count 6, 992 words.